You're traveling through another podcast. A podcast not only of reviewing and discussing, but of discovery. A journey into a wondrous show whose boundaries are that of imagination. That's the RSS feed up ahead. Your next stop, Anthology. Hello and welcome to a special episode of Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. Ordinarily, Anthology is a one man's exploration of the Twilight Zone as a first-time viewer, along with some bonus episodes reviewing modern anthology science fiction shows such as Black Mirror and Dimension 404 on Hulu. But this episode is kind of special. It's kind of my special episode before the start of season 2 of Anthology. This is a panel that I hosted at Indiana Comic-Con on April 15th. I kind of, on a whim, submitted a panel idea or panel suggestion to Comic-Con several months back. The panel idea was for hosting a solo podcast. What it takes, what the trials and tribulations are, just the trials and tribulations of hosting a solo podcast. So I went ahead and hosted it, and it was a blast. I had a really good turnout. There was something like 20, 25 people there. They asked a ton of great questions, and as soon as I got into it, I was just, I wasn't as nervous as I thought I was going to be, but it was a blast. I did notice a couple of things. One, I don't think I said my name at all throughout the whole thing. And two is I completely forgotten an anecdote about something on it, but I went ahead and I did record it, so I'm gonna throw it out there on the feed if anyone wants to hear me talk about podcasting, and about hosting a solo podcast, maybe get some like kind of behind the scenes look at what goes on with Anthology and how it's done and everything. I figured I'd throw it out there for anyone that wants to listen. And I made the very conscious decision to record this after recording the first episode of season 2 of Anthology. So if you are waiting for season 2 to start, you only have a couple of days to wait. I'm going to post that here at the end of the week here, and get that up for you guys, and we can continue Anthology. And I'll also be starting my bonus review series of Hulu's Dimension 404 from the people at Rocket Jump. So be on the lookout for that. I can't wait to get back into the swing of things, and I really appreciate your guys' patience as I kind of took a little bit of a longer hiatus than I expected to. Work got a little crazy, but I'm back, and I hope you guys enjoy. So here's my panel from Indiana Comic-Con 2017 on how to host a solo podcast, or hosting a solo podcast. And if you're listening to this, and if you were at the panel, or if you were at Comic-Con, or we met there, thank you so much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it. So without further ado, here is my panel from Indiana Comic-Con. Hey guys. Wow, that's loud. I probably should have tested that. Welcome to hosting a solo podcast, my panel here at Indiana Comic-Con. My name is Matt. I have hosted podcasts since June 2013. I had me and my friend Tiny, who's right over there, we started the Obsessive Viewer, which currently, as of today, we just released our 206th episode, and totaling about 305 hours of audio, which is kind of crazy to me. But also in August of 2015, I started a solo podcast where it was just me hosting a podcast called Anthology, which is a solo side project podcast where I review every episode of The Twilight Zone, one episode at a time. And I'm reviewing them as a first-time viewer of The Twilight Zone. I've never seen The Twilight Zone before in my life, so I'm kind of going through it for the first time. And so up to date, like as of today, I have 46 episodes of Anthology out there at anthologypod.com. 33 main episodes plus 13 bonus episodes, totaling about 41 hours of audio content that's just me on the microphone. So it's kind of it's a little hard to imagine that I actually did that, because I never thought that I would do like a solo podcast. I just kind of had this idea, and I had a job where I didn't really have to do anything, so I just spent that time kind of researching and starting a new podcast on my own. So, and a lot of people, the reason why I thought that this would be a good idea for a panel here at Comic-Con is that a lot of people, when I tell them that I have a solo podcast, they say, well, I could never do that, because that it would just be kind of crazy to be just the only person on a podcast talking to the world, because they would have no one to bounce off of. And honestly, like, it's not really been my experience that it's hard to actually make the podcast. So I kind of wanted to give like I wouldn't say expertise, because I'm still not like I'm still learning. It's podcasting as a hobby is something that's kind of it's something that you learn as you go, and it's kind of what you make it, and the effort you put into it, and what you put into it is kind of a reflection of what the finished product is. It's kind of your own thing. It's not a defined thing. So anyway, thank you guys for coming to the panel here. I mean, I'm kind of blown away by the turnout. This is awesome. So how many people here in the audience, how many of you guys have a podcast or been on a podcast? Okay. Awesome. That's awesome. And how many of you have like a solo podcast or have thoughts about starting a solo podcast? Perfect. Great. Yeah. So yeah, that's fantastic. And how many of you just listen to podcasts? Awesome. Nice. And how many of you are tired of raising your hands and everything? Gotcha. All right. So so one of the main things that I have whenever someone asks me about what it takes to start a solo podcast is that they can't imagine like talking by themselves and everything. And I think that there's kind of a misconception or this, maybe not misconception, but maybe this idea that you have to script out everything. It needs to be perfectly scripted out. Word for word, you need to know, like, okay, you need to know what you're going to say when, and obviously, before I get into the nitty gritty of it, like, your mileage may vary, so, different strokes, people, different things work for different people, but when you go through, basically taking on the complete production of a podcast or any kind of venture like that, it's what you want out of it. So when I started out doing it, I kind of thought, okay, well, I don't know if I can do just holding down a show by myself without like Tiny or anyone else on the podcast to kind of play off of. So I had my nerves too, but once I started, it kind of flowed naturally. It was kind of a fun activity that I was another way to kind of stretch my creative ways, and it also helped me learn about the Twilight Zone and how awesome it is. So with some tips about getting over that fear of not knowing if you can handle the solo podcast or handle being on the microphone by yourself. Like, one of the things that I did was I basically I recorded one pilot episode that was just completely for like my peers or like I ran it through some other podcast friends, had them give me notes on it. That episode never aired. It was never posted online or anything. I just needed to get some feedback on how it was and if I could, because I had no idea if I could actually do it or anything. So that's one way that you can kind of get a feel for it. And a lot of people are worried that they'll have moments where they will just run out of things to say, or like what happens if it's just dead air. And it's like, well, in my perspective on a podcast, like, you control the entire production of it. So like if I fumble on it, or if I just completely space out or anything, that stuff I can just cut out. It's not a big deal. But and it's just, I feel like a lot of people just have fears about how the podcast will go, and then they'll write out notes and create just these. At least what I experienced was that I was finding in the early days that I would write down detailed notes about each section of the podcast, each segment and everything. And I felt like that was one way of me postponing the part I was most nervous about by overdoing the planning of it. And another thing was I kind of didn't. I picked the Twilight Zone because it was a show that I wasn't familiar with. I knew it had a huge following, and I just thought, okay, well, maybe I can give myself an excuse to watch it. That is one way that I don't necessarily recommend people going, or I mean, not necessarily not recommend people going, but there are two options with picking a topic. You can pick either a topic that you're very well versed in, and that can help alleviate the fears of posting something or commenting on something that you're, it can give you more confidence on the mic, I should say. But if you pick something new, that kind of puts more pressure on you. So I kind of didn't think that through when I picked it, but it's become something that's really fun for me. I'm learning a lot about the show and learning a lot about the trivia behind it. It's not like I'm just binge watching The Twilight Zone and commenting on it. I'm researching each episode. And then it's opening me up to other types of shows. Like I did bonus episodes about Black Mirror, since it's also a sci-fi anthology show. And I'm also going to be doing bonus reviews for Hulu's Dimension 404. So I'm pretty excited about that. But that's one of the things that I really love about doing a solo podcast is that it's opening me up to these different things and these different media, different types of media that I wouldn't necessarily know about. And in terms of picking a topic, I know that I had, when I picked the Twilight Zone, or when I had the idea of the Twilight Zone, I started Googling other Twilight Zone podcasts, because obviously I want to see what all is out there, how much better they are than I am, basically. And I kind of got this sense that, okay, well, they already have, like, the Twilight Poem. That's already, like, a hugely successful podcast, and they're clearly more knowledgeable about the show than I am. They clearly have a bigger following than I probably will throughout the life of Anthology. But then I kind of thought, like, well, you know, that's great. That's great for them and everything. But I kind of lost sight of the fact that podcasting as a hobby is something that is more a reflection of your personality and who you are. Like, I get the sense that, and maybe this is, I don't know, maybe it's just what people, from my perspective, podcasting is something that people listen to for the personalities of the hosts. And I like to think that I attract people that are, you know, that like my personality, and they aren't necessarily too concerned about, well, maybe not too concerned about the content, but I like the idea of people putting me in their ears for hours every week and listening to me and feeling like they get to know me. And I'll get messages on, like, Facebook and tweets and everything saying, like, oh, hey, yeah, I thought about, I saw this in the news and thought about this episode when you said this, and I'm just like, oh, wow, this dude's in New Mexico. That's nuts. Which is another kind of stumbling block with starting a solo podcast, is you don't have, like, the co-host to kind of put some workload on. Like, you don't have, like, okay, well, we got this tweet or we got this email, this very well thought out email. I can't, like, say, like, well, okay, if I'm super busy at work, I can't be like, okay, well, co-host, why don't you, you know, just, like, send them a message, say, like, hey, yeah, we'll read this on the next one, or respond to a tweet, or keep up with social media. It's kind of the bulk of all the work is on you, and it's kind of, that can put a lot of pressure on yourself there. But like, different things work. If you're sticking to a schedule, if you're the type of person that works well with adhering to a schedule, it's really great to kind of keep track of what everything is. It's kind of a way to tailor the podcast and everything to yourself and to your own personalities and what works for you. And what works for you. Yeah, so that's kind of in a roundabout way. That's a lot of information, I'm sure. But Another thing about podcasts that like a solo podcast, one of the big trials that I had with starting Anthology was that if I got like a negative review or a negative feedback, it was a lot easier to take that a little more personally, just because Anthology is my thing. Like, it's completely 100% me that I'm putting it in there. So I got like a pretty negative review, and I was like, "Oh man, this is kind of brutal." So it's easy to. That's like another tip is to learn not to take it personally and use the feedback to really create something that works. But you can't really please everyone. So does anyone have any questions? Go on. Anything about podcasts?
How do you go about starting a fan base? I mean, if you're going to start your own project, obviously you're not going to have listeners immediately.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Starting a fan base. That's the interesting thing about starting a podcast that's just you, because you don't like. Obviously, if I was working on Obsessive Viewer, my main podcast, for a couple years before starting Anthology. And I got some listeners that would gravitate over to my Anthology podcast, but there's also, I couldn't depend on that fan base gravitating toward that, because I don't know how many of them are annoyed by my voice or anything. But I did find that a lot of people were latching on to Anthology because it was a niche topic. Like, the Twilight Zone is very specific. The Obsessive Viewer, that's a weekly movie and TV podcast, that's kind of broad and everything. But with Anthology, this is focused on one thing. People that listen to podcasts and are seeking out podcasts about specific topics, they'll find mine instead of typing in like, a movie or TV podcast. So that's one way that you can kind of tailor how you pick a topic, is that you can kind of pick something that's sort of that's sort of a niche topic. It doesn't necessarily need to be something you're very knowledgeable about or very well versed in, or it can be something you know a lot about, whatever your comfort level is. But if it's something that's specific to something or a specific fan base, that fan base will find any media that is searching for it. And if you pick something like I did with the Twilight Zone, something you don't know about, that you kind of want to learn more about, that comes with its own challenges, but I would have to recommend that you would have to confirm and make sure that you know the creator's name correctly, because there was an instance with the first episode of my podcast where I mispronounced Rut Serling's name a couple times, and it was not a good start to Anthology, and yeah, but when you have hiccups like that and you have things like that, I've at least noticed from my personality type and the way I react to it is I kind of go full nuclear reaction, thinking like, oh my god, this is going to be terrible, I need to redo this, or I need to fix this, or it can tie up the production of the podcast by being in my own head about it. But at the end of the day, it's still a learning exercise. It's still something that you're still learning to do, and it's still something that's that grows with you. Yeah, your question?
So you spoke briefly about writing all your episodes out beforehand, make sure you have the content ready. I've been doing that myself, and I have a lot written. But the more I look over it, the more I'm like, well, it would be better to just kind of have a kind of flow to it instead of just kind of read everything out. Sure. How do you get over trying to write everything out and just being more personal?
Sure. So his question was how to get over the urge to write everything out, or if you're in a habit of planning a podcast where you're doing it one way and then you want to gravitate to a more efficient way. That's one of the things. Like, if you have it all written out, it's like that can be great and helpful because you have everything, all the information there. But it can also, at least in my head, it could feel like you're reading from a paper. But what I did and what I found with Anthology is that each episode I had kind of some more bullet points and more information kind of there. But as I got into the routine of doing it, I somewhat not stupidly, but somewhat didn't really think this through. I made it a weekly podcast, which is a lot of pressure on me to do with Obsessive Viewer also being a weekly podcast. Also, me not getting paid for any of it, so I have a full-time job and I have all that stuff. But what I found was that as I would go, each episode I would have kind of fewer notes and more, not necessarily just bullet points. Like for me, I would have like statements written out that I would basically use as launching points for topics. I would, with mine, I don't know specifically what your podcast is, but with mine, I would basically watch the Twilight Zone episode that I was reviewing, and I would watch it once, take some kind of cold viewing notes for the first viewing, and then I would watch it again. If there was a commentary, I'd watch that and make notes and everything there. And then I would kind of put those notes together in kind of a way that would be not necessarily scene by scene, but just like kind of topic by topic. Like okay, this guy referenced this, said this line of dialogue that comes back into play later in the episode. We'll get to that in a moment, but I just want to say, like, when he said this the first time I viewed it, I thought of it as a reference to this, or I expected it to go this way or that way. I don't like, that's not verbatim from the podcast. It's just, but yeah, it's something that you kind of grow with as you grow it. And that's one of the big stumbling blocks with hosting a solo podcast, is that if you're in a routine, or if you think that you're doing something that isn't necessarily working for you, you may get the feeling that it's the way that it's supposed to be done, but there's no way that it's supposed to be done. So if it's something that you're knowledgeable about, I would recommend just kind of weaning yourself off of writing very thorough notes, and just kind of put not bullet points, but just statements, like just a full sentence, and then practice or try to get in the habit of you can read the full statement on the recording, and then just kind of go from there as if you're, and this, I don't know how this is going to sound, but it's almost like you're having a conversation with yourself, which is kind of what the whole solo podcast thing is essentially. But it's that way you can say that statement, you see that it's written there, and then in your head you can kind of fill in more information and not repeat, but you can follow up on that statement, and kind of, I don't know, in my head it kind of triggers it as I'm kind of responding to a statement that's right in front of me, and it kind of feels a little bit more natural there. Any other questions?
Yeah, what equipment do you use?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah. So equipment that I use, it's kind of a funny story, really. With Obsessive Viewer, we have a mixer. So I use an Alesis Multimix 8. It's just a board that I plug in my microphone, and then I plug in my H2N to the output and record it that way directly into it. I got that equipment because my car broke down 3 years ago, and I thought it was going to be a whole bunch more money, so I kind of took a loan out from my credit union. It ended up being $100, so I just used the rest on podcast equipment. But in terms of podcast equipment and stuff, there are some tricks you can use to help out sound in post-production. A lot of the podcasts that really my routine for editing a podcast and everything is I record it that way, so it kind of comes through sounding pretty good. But you can also use a USB microphone that plugs into a laptop, and use Audacity. That's the program I use to record when I'm recording into a laptop. Really great program, easy to use, and really straightforward. And it's also free, which is great. So, but with that, it's there's kind of some steps that I do for post-production. So I'll record the entire episode, and then before I touch it, before I edit it, make any cuts or anything, I will take a section of the podcast, at the beginning, that's silent. I'll
record it that way. I'll just record just ambient sounds in the room for about 10 seconds, and then I'll use noise removal in Audacity, and that will remove the noise, that like any background noise or room noise there. And then I'll like normalize the audio, and then I'll export it and put it into the program that I use to edit, which I use Studio One, which I got for a Christmas present a few years ago. It's great. We were using GarageBand for a long time, and it kept crashing, which was terrible for me. But Audacity is pretty good with editing as well. But that's kind of the steps, the processes that I use. Is I use the board with a XLR microphone going into it. This is all stuff that you can find at Guitar City, or is Guitar City? Is that the name of the place? Guitar Center. There we go. Thank you, guys. Guitar Center, or Amazon, but yeah, and it's Guitar City. Anyway, it's it's an investment, and it's an investment, and it's for something that's, you're not, at least from my perspective, you're not going to make like a lot of money off of it. If anyone has any tips on making money off of it, let me know. But but it's something that's, if you want it to sound good, you can buy some equipment that would do it. But if you just have like a simple USB microphone or something, when we started Obsessive Viewer, we were using Rock Band microphones from the Rock Band game that we plugged into a computer. And we actually they were so sensitive that we had like extra long USB cords for it. So we were each on the other side of the room, and we had we didn't have mic stands like this. We just had shoes that we put it in. And we had to like be very, very careful, because anytime we moved the mic, or anytime we like touched it or anything, it would just have like feedback, and it would be terrible. But with a good post-production thing, I think those episodes sound pretty good for especially starting out. Like I said, noise removal is kind of a godsend, and also normalizing is really good, especially when I used to like levelate the audio. There's a program called Levelator that you basically put in the audio file, and it just levels out the sound waves to be, so it's not like very loud or very low or everything like that. And then that's great. So I used to do that like after I edited it, and then I got kind of paranoid, because like when I edit, I have to cut a lot, because there's a lot of moments where I'm like, oh, this actor in the Twilight Zone was really great, and he was also in this, and then I'll accidentally say something stupid, and then I'll have to repeat it, and then I just have to cut around it and everything. So I got really nervous that if I'm leveling the audio there, is it gonna come through as choppy or weird, because it's not like the full uninterrupted audio. So what I've been doing is I've been normalizing it, leveling it, and putting it into the editing software. And then the final part is I put a compressor effect on it, which is pretty much standard on any editing software. I know that you can just highlight all the audio on Audacity and just put a compressor on it, and it makes it sound good. And then I edit it, and then once the edits are in, I just export it. Yeah. And you in the back?
Yeah. Are you ever going to think about with your podcast about having guests or something like that? Having that second person, and if so, being a one-person podcast, how do you think that's going to be different? A different experience.
Sure. So do you mean like having a guest on, like a permanent co-host on?
No.
Oh, okay. Like guest episodes?
I had so-and-so who was Weberstack's shoe guy.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, and that's a great question. The question was if I would ever have like guests on for episodes of the podcast, and I actually have a couple episodes where I've had a guest on, and it's been really, really great, because it's been kind of a nice break. So I had one episode where I basically reviewed. There was an episode of an anthology show that was pre The Twilight Zone. The episode was called The Time Element. It was the first thing that Rod Serling wrote that he put The Twilight Zone name on. So CBS aired it on another show before they actually bought the pilot for The Twilight Zone. So what I did was I had my friend Tiny from Obsessive Viewer, I had him on Anthology as kind of a special episode in between seasons 1 and 2 of Anthology to kind of discuss that episode in particular. And then at the end of season 1, I had a full episode where it's just a season 1 wrap-up of The Twilight Zone, which I had with my friend Brandon from another Twilight Zone podcast called, oh my god, I'm spacing on it. Wow, why am I spacing on it? And I'm on Facebook Live. I hope he's not watching it now. No, it's, oh wow. I'm sorry, I did not sleep that much last night. Okay, no, it's, oh wow, this is so embarrassing. I'm so sorry, Brandon. Submitted for Your Approval. Why did I forget that? Submitted for Your Approval. I was a guest on his on season 1, and we had I basically had him on for Anthology to talk about season 1 of The Twilight Zone. And that was really interesting because I had someone who was knowledgeable about The Twilight Zone, and also Submitted for Your Approval is a great podcast. He doesn't do a solo podcast about it, but he has a guest on every episode, and it's a lot of, like, he's got some, like, really cool guests. He had, like, Graham Elwood, Ali Gertz from the Everything's Coming Up podcast from The Simpsons. But anyway, it was really great to have someone to play off of, but kind of at the end of the day, I kind of want to keep those guest episodes as like special, like after season episodes or in between episode kind of things, because the kind of main topic or the main point of the podcast is that I'm learning about the Twilight Zone for the first time, and I think that's kind of what I'm making my audience, like, I think that's kind of what the audience wants to hear about. But I like having other guests on. So I'm not, like, I've had people approach me to be on it, and so I'm trying to find, like, ways to let them on, but they're kind of, like, special circumstances. But yeah, I've had guests on, and it's been great. Yeah. Yep.
You mentioned seasons, which kind of makes me think about continuation. So how many episodes, like, per season is good for something like that? Like, for your first man, like, you could be being solo. Mm-hmm. Like, I was thinking like maybe 10 was good for like the first season kind of thing, but like, what would you recommend?
Oh yeah, 10 episode seasons would be great. I have since it's the Twilight Zone, his question was how long the seasons would be. Since it's the Twilight Zone, each season is like 33 episodes. Since it's back in the 60s and they had super long seasons. So I try to keep to that schedule. I'm currently like on hiatus between seasons 1 and 2, but I do like to keep, and this is another kind of good tip, is that I do kind of like to build up episodes and then record like 3 in one sitting. So like I'll spend like a couple weeks making notes for the next 3 episodes, making sure they're polished and I have all the information and everything. And then I've had days where, maybe this is more reflective of my social life, I've had days where I just spend like a Sunday just in front of the mic recording for 3 hours. And yeah, so it kind of varies depending on the topic and depending on your ability to, like, your workload and how you can do that.
You mentioned one week was kind of like a lot to be asking for. What's your time frame to have? For something, it's only like 30 minutes or like an hour.
Oh yeah.
So what's a good time frame to have something to put out?
Yeah. Do you mean like time frame for like timing of releasing episodes or time frame for runtime?
Well, I guess
both. Okay, yeah. So a good time frame for releasing it is based on your workload, but based on like what you're comfortable with. You never really want to have yourself like under the gun to release episodes. So it depends on a lot of different factors. So like if you have a topic that you want to do 30 minutes on each week. That's actually a really great starting point. My episodes run about 50 to 60 minutes because I do review the Twilight Zone, and then I made the really smart decision to also do bonus reviews each episode of something related to that episode. So it's kind of doubling up a little bit, but it's a lot of fun, but it is also a lot of work. But what I've also found in terms of that is that you will get more, at least if you have experience with recording like a multi-person podcast versus doing the solo podcast, you'll find that it's a lot easier, at least I have, it's a lot easier to edit your solo podcast because you're not worrying about like clipping people's conversations over or cutting out things like that. Like with me, after maybe a handful of anthology episodes, I just basically got into the habit of not flipping out whenever I fumbled something, or not getting nervous when I fumbled something on the mic, because I would know, okay, well, I'd mentally think like, okay, this is the point that I edited, this is where I can pick it back up, and so you get a better sense of what you are there. And as far as like run times for episodes, like I said, mine are about 50 to 60 minutes, and I know some people might think, oh, that's maybe not like, I don't think I can talk that long, or I'm nervous that I'd run out of steam. You kind of get a handle for what like time frame you can do, or how comfortable you are with what time frames are good for the episodes. So it's kind of tailored to each individual host. Yeah. And did you have a question, sir?
Yeah. You mentioned like finding a niche. How do you feel about something that's like more random, like? How would that show up, like to get followers? Like if I just pick a random topic on top of that for now.
Okay, like a random, just not like a specific topic, just anything random. Okay. Yeah, so with his question was if there was any like how I felt about putting a random topic out for each podcast. Yeah, you can definitely do that. I don't know, like I know with Obsessive Viewer, we're a movie and TV podcast, so we just are a very broad kind of thing. Like, one week we'll review a Netflix show, the next week we'll do a topic about presidents and movies and TV, and so it's kind of hard for like people to find that. But if you have something that's you can do random topics if it's like a current event thing, or like, oh, this is something that's in the news or something. I think that could gravitate to people. Or if it's like, hey, carburetors are funny, that could be good. Like, you can find like that you can find that perfect niche of people who are super into carburetors, and maybe they'll check out your other episodes and stuff. That's what I would do, that's what I would think, because it's funny, because I will have people that are listening to it that are like, oh, I really like listening to you, and I'm like, that's so the opposite of what people at my call center job tell me on the phone, but cool. Like, I got a message from someone in Michigan saying, hey, your podcast is my favorite podcast, and me and my husband really like how not annoying your voice is. And I'm like, that is the biggest compliment I could get. That is so awesome. So you'll find, I'm of the belief that you'll find people will find you no matter what you're posting. It also helps, like, kind of go to conventions if you can. Like, we do not panels, but we get booths at Indie PopCon, and we're always around the different conventions here. But if that's not like in your topic range or anything, there's stuff like different message boards, different subreddits, stuff like that. As long as you're not like spamming it all over the place, but yeah, I'm of the belief that there is an audience out there for everyone, no matter what it is. If it's just whenever I make a stupid joke on a podcast, I always think to myself, like, do I really want to put that out in the world? Do I really want that audio of me talking to my cat to be in the podcast? And then I think, you know what? There's like 7 billion people in the world. Chances are, like, there's going to be a couple that think it's as funny as I think it is. So that's kind of what I'm thinking, because I think that if people, you want to attract the people that you are on the same wavelength with, because you'll get more response, and you'll have a better time and a more enjoyable and fulfilling time, conversing with people that you literally would have never known existed had you not started a podcast. Like, I have people that email in from New Mexico and a couple other states, and like they're like every week they're sending an email saying like, oh hey, I really like this, and like I've gotten the habit of like this one guy, he'll email me like in the middle of the night after I release the episode, and I'm like, I don't know what this dude's schedule is, but it's awesome. So yeah, can I get?
I'm a high school English teacher, and I came to the panel because I'm interested in using podcasts as a way to convey information. I'm thinking about getting my students to do podcasts for class.
Oh, that's awesome.
For like conveying information to prove to me that they know what's going on in my class. So, what advice would you have for me to give to students who I teach high school? So to students who maybe have never done this before, they've listened to them because they're way more advanced than I am. I'm new on this. So, what advice would you have for me to give to them? How would I go about maybe shepherding them into doing this? What's your opinion?
Oh, that is awesome. I've never really thought about podcasting as like a learning tool and everything, using it in the classroom. That's really cool. I would love that. That's creative. I would think like you can have applications for it, and you can get them to record. Like, everyone has a smartphone. Every smartphone has like a simple recording thing. Like, I've gone to like film festivals and stuff where I like, say my battery on my recorder dies, I'll just take out my phone and be like, hey, talk to me into this microphone or into this phone, which might be kind of hard for people. Like, I know it might be hard for teenagers to think like, why would I talk into my smartphone? But because no one uses the phone anymore. But yeah, I would think like that would be a really cool like learning tool to have, like, for either from a teacher's perspective, like releasing, like if you wanted to like record like a summary or something and like release, like give the audio files to them to listen to, or have them like do like peer reviews and stuff like that. I think that would be a really cool outlet for a really creative way to do that. Yeah. Did you have any? Did I answer your question?
I just literally had this idea like 2 days ago.
Okay.
So it's just still kind of percolating. I just
Sure.
didn't know what. And most of the kids would probably be doing it solo because, you know, if they work together,
Sure.
a lot of work gets done a lot
Yeah.
of the time. So that's why I came to this panel specifically. But I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, and then they probably would be a little overwhelmed and not really know what to do either. So
Sure.
Right.
And that would be, yeah, especially for like a topic like English. I know that some kids may, I mean, from my memory of being in school, I feel like some kids may get kind of bogged down with like English, like if you're teaching like grammar and stuff like that, like on the page, like thinking like, okay, which word is the operative word, which is whatever. Maybe having them speak it and like actually say, like verbally say it into a microphone could be a better way to, or an easy, not better way, but like an easy way to kind of bridge that gap there. That'd be really interesting. Yeah, I like that. You?
Yeah, I was just wondering how you boost your audience and subscribes and downloads and all that.
That is a great question, how I boost my listeners and everything. Anthology actually has like probably between 2 to 3 times as many listeners as Obsessive Viewer, even though it's only been out for, Obsessive Viewer was out for a few years before it. And I think the reason is it's mostly due to networking with other podcasters. When you have a specific niche or a specific topic for a podcast, either you're going to contact other podcasters or they're going to contact you, and that's a great way to network. Like, I've met people who have podcasts all over the world who we will sit there and we'll just swap, like we'll talk shop and everything, and then that's a great way to get to get onto their shows, or have them onto yours for special episodes. Also, like every niche, every topic, everything has a corner of the internet, and it's really a great way to go, as long as you're genuine and you're not showing up saying like, hey, listen to my podcast. Sometimes I'll have like a signature or something like in a message board and just say like, oh, just the link to it. but I'll have everything be on topic and everything. But yeah, in terms of boosting like listenership and everything, I think with certain niches and like with the Twilight Zone in particular, like those fans of the specific topics that you're talking about, they spend a lot of their time talking to other fans, or they will promote it on social media or something. And as far as social media is concerned, it is also pretty hard to go through that kind of on your own by yourself, because you don't have like, you know, if you don't have a co-host who works at different shifts, so he'd be home when you're at work. So if a tweet comes in or something, he can respond to it. So it's kind of this is a good problem to have, but if you're bogged down and everything, it could be hard to keep up. So it's best to keep a perspective on it. So like if you want to say, okay, I'll post a Twilight Zone related picture on Instagram every other day, or I'll post a funny thing that I thought about for the podcast on this day. It's kind of hard to keep up with all that. But one thing, if you're kind of using social media, there's an app called Buffer that you sign in with Twitter and everything. You can schedule tweets up to, I think, 10 tweets at a time to different times. So sometimes I'll like be like, oh, hey, Twilight Zone. And then I'll have a tweet that goes out like in the middle of the next day and stuff like that. And as long as you're active and you're consistent with it, it will... I'm of the thought that if you're consistent with your show, the Obsessive Viewer notwithstanding right now, because Tiny just bought a house, so we've been kind of a little touch and go there, and I'm also on hiatus from Anthology, but if you're consistent with your releases and your content, people that are listening will continue listening, and they'll reach out to people who will also like to listen.
I've heard on several different podcasts with professional managers and how you don't get into it for the money, which I'm not, but money is kind of important to survive, period.
Oh yeah.
So as far as like merchandising, I've heard a few. They might have little things they give out and all that stuff, but at what point would be a good point to start merchandising, to start putting out that, because it helps people not only buy your material, but people get interested in all that kind of stuff. So when is a good jumping off point to start doing something?
Sure. So a good tipping off point for starting merchandising or getting money kind of in, like putting out a call to action. I know that recently with Obsessive Viewer and Anthology, because I basically set up a separate checking account specifically for podcasts. So I have all the fees for the website and the Libsyn fees. By the way, I use Libsyn for my host for both podcasts. It's a great, we've had it for 3 years. I've never had a problem with, almost 4 years, and we've never had a problem with it. It's great, but I have a separate checking account. So I've always been hesitant about asking for money and asking for donations and everything. But we eventually bit the bullet and we started a Patreon. And Patreon is really great for podcasters in general, because if you have listeners and you have an audience, they'll want to, be your Patreon subscriber and pay you money. And if you have like merchandising, there's I can't remember the site. I think is it Teespring? You can have like logo designs for your show, and they can have campaigns where you can basically put out, say, hey, if people order like 20 or so shirts, you'll get shipped out to everyone. But I would think that a good kind of tipping off point, a good idea for when to start that is a little bit after, and then, again, this is my own personal opinion, your knowledge may vary, but is once you've established yourself a little bit and proven that you are, once you have some shows under your belt, because like I, actually with Anthology, after about 5 episodes, I took a 7-month hiatus, which I don't recommend doing at all. It was just I got bogged down with work and everything, and it was not a good time to launch a podcast at that time. So I basically got to a point where I was like, I'm going to relaunch it eventually, but it's going to be at a time where I can really commit to it. So I eventually did it 7 months later, and I really stuck with it, and it's rewarding to me because that's when I kind of noticed that's when I was getting more, well, obviously that's when I was getting more listeners and everything because I was putting out content, but it was also like that's when I was getting more interaction. And once that interaction comes in, that's kind of when you kind of get the sense that maybe I can grow this into something more than what it is now. Because I feel like with solo podcasts, there is this connection with the audience that's a little bit different from having a multi-host podcast. So if you're listening to a podcast with 2 or 3 hosts, you're getting a sense of their chemistry and their chemistry and how they interact and everything. It can kind of feel like a fly on the wall kind of thing. But with a solo podcast, there's a more personal connection with the audience because that audience is you're talking to them. And I found that I've gotten a lot more emails about Anthology just because I'm putting this information out there, and I feel like maybe they feel a little sorry for me because I don't have anyone to play off of, but I mean, they'll respond and say like, oh yeah, I really liked what you said about this. I had this thought when I did this. And once you get that, like, it gets a little bit easier to hit them up for money. Not that I do. I just, and I'm always weird about it, so I'm always like, hey, if you want to donate to the podcast or help support us, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Money will go, like, I have different tiers for Anthology and for Obsessive Viewer. Also, a PayPal link is great. So, and I would also recommend, like, and this goes back to the other gentleman's question about growing your audience. If there's like a convention or a group gathering for your topic, or just podcasting in general, like Indie PopCon, Indiana Comic Con, the different nerd culture conventions around here, a lot of them are like, they have like good resources for podcasters. And it's a great networking opportunity as well. It's a great way to kind of get to know the other podcasters in your area and kind of swap notes and everything. And it's a great way to kind of grow your brand. Also, stickers are always awesome. And business cards, which I do have business cards if you guys want any. But yeah, so that's another way to kind of grow your audience and everything. Yep.
For someone who's starting their own podcast, what websites would you suggest?
Oh, okay, like what, for resources to learn about it and everything? Okay, yeah, great question. So what, like, for someone starting a podcast, like, what would be a good website or what are some good resources to learn about it and everything? The subreddit, if you guys use Reddit at all, the podcasts subreddit is a great resource for just information for anything about podcasting. I learned pretty much everything I know about podcasting from them. You'll find like there's a bunch of different like podcast centric podcasts. I think one's called like Podcast Helper. But there are podcasts specifically about the intricacies of podcasting and everything. And there's really great resources online to just learn like the ins and outs of starting a podcast. And it depends on your learning style and everything. So I'm kind of the thought that not like I kind of learn as I go. So I'll just put something out there, and then if I did something wrong, I'll learn as I get more into it and everything. But yeah, there are tons of like podcasting sites and everything that are really great resources for beginners and to learn the ins and outs. Because I never thought, like, when I first started podcasting, the first ever podcast that I recorded was back in June of 2013 with Tiny and our friend Greg for the first episode of Obsessive Viewer. Greg had, like, he's a local podcaster himself. He had a mixer, he had microphones, he had all this stuff hooked up and everything, and all I thought was, I'm never going to know what any of this means. Like, this is going to be so over my head. And turns out that he had no idea what he was doing either. So he told me that like a month later, or no, like a year or so later, and that was great because it would have freaked me out if he would have told me there. But it's a learning experience. It's something that you learn from doing and also from resources online. So yeah,
that's what's not learning.
Sure, you're good.
So you were on a podcast. What's it like, or where did you get the inspiration from to start something like another podcast channel that's separate from what you've already been doing? Do you continue? Because on the first one when you continue the second?
So the question was how I got the idea or how I maintain both of them at the same time as well?
Split off and then try
Sure.
to contain more than one in the meeting.
Sure, absolutely. So with Obsessive Viewer, to be completely honest, guys, one of the reasons why I started the Anthology was to try to get more listeners to Obsessive Viewer. So every episode of Anthology, I have a short clip from a recent episode of Obsessive Viewer, kind of in between each one. It's worked a little bit, but I'm getting more interested in Anthology as well, but it's kind of becoming its own beast. But I kind of view it as kind of branding. So since they're somewhat similar, one's a movie and TV podcast, one is specifically about a TV show, I kind of present it as this is Anthology presented by ObsessiveViewer.com, even though it has its own URL and the logos don't really match up that much, because I got a great deal on a logo for Anthology and I couldn't pass it up. But with as far as that, I would see it as kind of a branding thing, because when you're podcasting, it's really like your brand is for me. It's your personality. It's what you're putting into it. The for lack of a better word, the performance of the podcast. That's your brand. That's what you're bringing to the table, as well as the content for whatever subject you're covering. So if people like listening to your one show and then you branch off and do another one, they could follow you over there, and it's just because it's an extension of your brand. And in terms of keeping it going at the same time, it's a pretty big juggling act. It can be pretty difficult, especially if it's not too difficult if you don't have much going on in your personal life, but if things come up, it's kind of hard to do that. And one of the biggest stumbling blocks for me is just I am a procrastinator by my nature. I will kind of wait until the last minute to do something. So one of the issues that I've experienced is with a solo podcast, you don't have a co-host to kind of keep you accountable. So there are times with, I may have mentioned this earlier, there are times where Tiny will be coming over to record Obsessive Viewer, and I'll just be okay, I don't really feel like recording tonight, but he's coming over, so I'll push through and do it. If I tell myself, I'm going to record Anthology tonight, it's this video game needs to be done tonight. It's easy to kind of let that slip by. So that's one of the big issues that I've had, is that kind of making sure that you can sit down and do it. And sometimes, like I said, with if you get a negative review or some criticism here and there, it's easy to kind of think let that blow up and out of proportion and think well, am I really doing as best as I can? Am I really doing this for the real for the right reasons and everything? And what I found is that if you, and again, this is probably just how my brain works. If you experience that, I found that when you go back to it, when you go back into it and get into your routine, and this goes back to being consistent with it as possible, you'll grow to just love doing it. You kind of get a little bit of a high from it, just sitting down, recording it, knowing that you're putting out a product that people are hopefully listening to and enjoying, and that more people are going to find down the road. It kind of blows my mind to think okay, I'll get an email about an episode of The Twilight Zone or an episode of Anthology from last year, that I'll have to think they'll talk about a very specific point that I made or a joke that I made or something, and then I'll be wait, I don't even remember the context for this. It's just weird that it's out there and it's something that people will find. Yeah. I only do audio podcasts. Got a face for audio podcasts. No, I only do audio podcasts just because I feel like doing video is it would be a little bit more for two podcasts to do concurrently. It'd be a little bit more work. I know that it's getting a lot easier to just stream stuff. I've been streaming this entire panel on the Anthology Facebook page. Facebook Live is a great resource to just kind of have it going there. You can also set up like a Twitch thing or YouTube, and I think you can do like a live YouTube broadcast as well. Like, you can do that as you're recording it, and I mean, they'll get like your mumbles and your things there. But if you're comfortable with it, like, you can also kind of manage that way. And I know that for Tiny's side project podcast he has called The Secular Perspective, he does he and our friend Chad and Amanda, they do YouTube videos of it, and they'll release that kind of ahead of the audio, the finished audio product and everything on YouTube. And so it's kind of, and that's another way that you can get more audience, because a lot of people go to YouTube for things. To have a video component is a good, a strong way to do it, and it's getting easier to do it. I know that Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook Live are good resources for that. Yeah.
How long does it take you to edit an episode?
Yeah, how long it takes me to edit an episode? That's a tough question. Last night I edited an episode of our main podcast, Obsessive Viewer, that took me until like 4 a.m. Just because it was like a 2.5 hour recording. But anyway, with Anthology, it's a lot easier than you would think, because it's just one person on the mic and it's easy to cut out. I'll have little tricks here and there that when I'm recording it, I'll just know where to edit, the edit spaces and everything. I listen to every episode from beginning to end when editing, because I've tried like putting like timestamps like on a notepad and everything. I just felt like I'm not great at multitasking, so I feel like that it would just distract me from talking on it. So I would say on average from recording, it takes me about probably an hour, maybe an hour 10 minutes to record the episode, and then it takes me probably 20 minutes to get it prepped for editing. And then the rule of thumb is 1.5 minutes for every minute of audio. So it would take me maybe an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes to edit it and get it prepped and everything. So it's a bit of a time commitment if you really put it on paper there, but it's really rewarding. I don't know if this is a narcissistic thing or not, but I just really I get like really into the editing phase of it, because it's making me sound better than what I do normally, and so it's a really fun way to kind of feel like I'm being an extension of my creative output. It's a creative output for me to do the podcast and to edit it and everything, and it's really great to have this hobby that I just kind of put through there. Yep.
Do you use, or what kind of emphasis would you put on like a uniform intro outro?
Oh, that's a good question. A uniform intro and outro. I have an intro and outro that I do. So when I open my Studio One program, I basically I have a template for Anthology episodes. So it's kind of just it's a file that I open that has the opening and closing. I'm kind of a big believer of having an opening intro track. Basically for Anthology, I just put the theme song to The Twilight Zone underneath me, doing a really terrible Rod Serling impression. Just saying that, like, a variation of the opening segment that's promoting, like, saying this is Anthology presented by ObsessiveViewer.com, and it's really easy if you have that template file open, because you can just plug in on a separate track. You can plug in the recording and then edit it from there, and so you don't have to put like a bumper on it and everything. Yeah, and then I don't have a watch. Okay, yeah, I think we're about out of time here. I just realized it's 7:29. So, so I do have business cards here for Anthology, and I'll be out back there once I get all my stuff. So if you want to talk to me more, I'm out there. Thank you guys so much for coming, and I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, awesome. All right, thanks, guys.
All right. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, again, if you were in the audience and you listened to the episode now, thank you so much for coming. Shoot me a message or something with your podcast if you have more questions or anything. Because like I had a lot of people in the audience saying that they like had a podcast or they were starting a podcast, and anytime someone asks me that or anytime someone says that, I want to ask them about it and everything, but I didn't want to take up time for the panel, so I didn't get a chance to ask any of the questions that I wanted to ask them. So if you're listening to this after being at the panel and you have a podcast, let me know, and I'd be happy to throw it out there on social media as well. But yeah, so thank you guys for listening, and if you enjoyed this, you can always support the podcast by leaving a rating and review on iTunes, and if you're in a particularly giving mood, you can donate on the donate link on anthologypod.com, or become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. I do have reward tiers specifically for Anthology listeners, so go check that out. And yeah, here in a few days, you'll hear my review of King 9 Will Not Return, which is Season 2's season premiere of The Twilight Zone, and starring Robert Cummings. And yeah, you'll hear my review. My bonus review for that will be Bomber's Moon, which is an episode of Playhouse 90 written by Rod Serling that aired in May of 1958 and also starred Bob Cummings. And that is available in its entirety on YouTube. I will post a link in the show notes. And yeah, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to Anthology, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For more of Anthology and a full archive of my episodes, go to AnthologyPod.com. And if you want to help support the show, the easiest way you can do that is by leaving a rating and a review on iTunes. You can also make donations to the show courtesy of the donate link in the show notes of each episode and on AnthologyPod.com. For recurring donations, you can become a patron at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and just choose one of the Anthology reward tiers. If you enjoy Anthology, feel free to check out The Obsessive Viewer, a weekly movie and TV podcast I host with my friend Tiny and occasional guest co-hosts over at obsessiveviewer.com. You can also join the Obsessive Viewer Facebook group at facebook.com/theobsessiveviewer. For book reviews and commentary on the world of reading, check out our sister site at obsessivebooknerd.com. And for philosophical discussions from a secular viewpoint, check out my friends Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. Finally, if you'd like to contact me with your thoughts on the show, my reviews, my bonus reviews, or for any other reason, you can tweet me at obsessiveviewer, send me an email at matt@obsessiveviewer.com, or send me a message on Facebook and like the Facebook page at facebook.com/anthologypod. Once again, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.